Can you
Hello.
hear? Sorry.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you very much.
Welcome. So, shall we start, Ramesh? It's 2:30, or do we still wait a minute?
I think we have a pretty packed agenda. I recommend we start, if that's okay.
Sure. So, welcome to the session TA107 of the 2023 United Nations World Data Forum. My name is Patrick Gerland. I am the Chief of the Population Estimates and Projection section in the Population Division of the United Nations. It's a pleasure to be the moderator for today's session. Today, we will explore the challenges, opportunities, and lessons of integrating population, displacement, and geospatial data in humanitarian emergencies. Our focus will be on the evolving situation in Ukraine. This session is organized by the Interagency Working Group for Data Interoperability on baseline population, displacement, and refugee data, which was founded and is chaired by UNFPA. We'll begin today's session with a keynote address by Mr. Ihor Werner, the Director General of the State Statistical Service of Ukraine. Following Mr. Werner's keynote, we will have 3 lightning talks from UNHCR, IOM, and Worldpop, and then 2 sets of reflections by UNFPA and OCHA. The bibliographical profiles of our speakers are available on the UN World Data Forum portal. Before closing the session, we hope to have some time for interactive questions and answers. So please do post questions and comments throughout the session, as we will prioritize questions and comments posted in the chat window, and that will also help to streamline the Q&A session. So given the tight schedule, let's get started. It's a great pleasure to hand the floor to Mr. Ihor Werner, the Director General of the State Statistical Service of Ukraine, to set the scene from the perspective of the National Statistical Office in Ukraine on today's topic of data interoperability of baseline population, displacement, and geospatial data. Mr. Werner, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, dear colleagues, dear participants and delegates of the United Nations World Data Forum 2023. Let me say, on behalf of the Statistical Service of Ukraine, allow me to warmly welcome you at this estimated assembly and say to thank you very much for this possibility to address to you. First of all, let me say a few words about the last census in Ukraine. We have last census in Ukraine, unfortunately, only in 2001. More than 20 years, we can't conduct the census. We start to prepare to round of census for 2010. Immediately after the conducting census, when we finish conducting and making the result of census 2021. But unfortunately, because of internal reason, we should transfer, and we transfer the date of census for around 2010 several times, and we missed this round, unfortunately. And we start to prepare to the next round, 2020. And in 2019, we even conduct the successful pilot census, which allow us to prepare the round of census 2020. But and according our government resolution, last government resolution, we should conduct the census in 2023. But as you know, at 24th of February last year, Russian Federation starts a large-scale aggression against my country, against Ukraine. And each day, Russian troops bombarding our civilian city. This is the main reason why we have a lot of internal displaced people, and a lot of our people should emigrate in foreign countries, especially its west country, Poland, and country of Eastern and Western Europe. I wanted to say thank you for all people who let and provide the shelter for Ukrainian family, because our women with their child should be emigrate for saving their life. And right now we should to make new government resolution with transferring the census, because we have a martial law. According to this martial law, and according with our census law, we can't to provide the census during the martial law, and we can provide the census and conduct the census after 6 months when finish martial law. And unfortunately, right now we can't conduct our job for preparation of the census because of the war. And unfortunately, sorry for my emotion, but today's night, Russian troops bombarding our Mykolaiv city, and we have a regional office in this city, and some rockets explode near this building, and our building, located our regional office, unfortunately have some damages. But yes, we have a lot of problem, and we have a problem with our registration systems. As in my opinion, it's quite understandable when the people after on the bombarding, they leave their home and they don't think about any registration. Very often they lost their documents and they just ran away from country, from their region when they live in. And unfortunately, our administration, local authority can't, especially at first month, can't provide some registration procedure and registration service for some categories of people, and especially for on the temporary occupied territory and in territory under bombarding. According to this, we have a big problem with registration system and administrative records. Our system, unfortunately, substantially disrupted, and we lost our traditional sources for population estimates. But we can't stop. We should do our office, State Statistics Service of Ukraine, to continue their work. We continue to produce statistical information. For example, consumer price indexes, GDP, export-import, and social statistics and some kind of statistic. We continue to produce statistical information. Yes, we lost some sources, we lost some respondents, but we use some statistical methods to produce statistical information, to continue produce statistical information, because it's very important to have trustable data, even if you have a war in country. And we start to learn. We in Ukraine, we have more than 1,000 local territorial community. And according our national legislation, this territorial community should have special registry, which called Register of Territorial Community. And in this register, there are various pool of information about population and registration population. And we start to situation with these registers. After learning this situation, unfortunately, we have a conclusion what we can't use this information. Why? Because there is a time period then this register not filling and not support from administrators, and we lost this data sources, unfortunately. And right now we start our, not now, and last year we started the work with mobile operator data. And right now we estimate this direction as more preferable for population estimate in Ukraine. Yes, we have a lot of problem with mobile operator data. Why? Because the war and because bombarding and some military operation, a lot of communication tower of mobile operation was destroyed. And then Russian Federation occupied some, temporarily occupied some territory. They turn off this communication tower of mobile operators. And yes, when required understand this problem, we try to fix them. And right now, I want to say thank you very much our colleagues from UNFPA, and especially Mr. Jaime Nadal, which is representative UNFPA in Ukraine for their support in this job, and for their support on each our steps for our trying to estimate population in Ukraine. Thank you very much, dear colleagues, again. And right now we're working about some deals with we have free mobile operators in Ukraine. They cover all population of Ukraine, and to 2019 we have a special project with our mobile operator data, and we have experience with working with them, and we estimate in 2019 we estimate population in Ukraine. We get very close estimating from mobile operator after analyzing and producing mobile operator data. We get very close estimating because our official data, statistical data about population in Ukraine and mobile operator data. Right now we continue this work. We try to fix a lot of problems in this area. We work very close with our partners from UNFPA and mobile operator, and I have right now optimistic prognosis for results of this job. We try to get the data from mobile operators for 2021, 2022, and 2023 years. It allows us to get some coefficients, and for 2021 we can estimate all season adjustment for changing population in Ukraine, and after that we try to use some mathematics method to estimate population by the mobile operator data. But we don't stop. I repeat it again, and I want to say thank you again, our colleagues from UNFPA and key partners which help us and continue support us on our way from transition from traditional census to register-based census. And we, despite the war, we continue with job for transition from register-based census to, traditional census to register-based census. We estimate right now register-based census as more preferable way for us, more priority way for us, but right now we have a little bit delay in this way because war. Yes, it's understandable, but we continue our job. We continue the filling of registers according to our government resolution. Start some jobs. Comparing data between some key registers, and we continue this work right now. And yes, I want to say thank you again, our colleagues from UNFPA, for support on this way. Maybe briefly speaking, its way, I think it's quite understandable what we have a problem with estimating population, because we, in conclusion, are going to say, yes, we lost traditional sources. It's understandable. We have a lot of internal displaced people and people which emigrate from Ukraine. But there is a problem. Problem with with a lot of estimation, because we can hear different numbers from any kind of organization. For example, 9 million people, 7 million people immigrate from Ukraine, and right now allocated in Europe. According to our estimates, it's not true. And because the people which right now allocate in Europe, for example, we can to provide you accurate number, but it's not 907 million. I hope what after the estimate the population with mobile operator data, I, we can to speak about the population quantity. We can count population that stay in Ukraine, and after that we can provide the more accurate accuracy data
Thank you,
for
Mr. Werner.
all organization. Sorry.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
You have all our sympathy and solidarity with all the staff of the Statistic Office, and hope that everyone will be safe. Thanks for summarizing the persistent challenges and some of the emerging strategies for the measurement and the projection of the subnational population dynamics in Ukraine. And now we would like to transition to the short presentation by Sebastian Stanumler from UNHCR to provide an overview of the situation with the data on the asylum seekers and the refugees. Sebastian?
Thank you very much. My name is Sebastian Steinmüller from UNHCR Statistics and Demographics section, and I would like to give a brief overview of the data situation and some of the challenges we've got with data on refugees from Ukraine. Now, our latest preliminary estimate from just this month is there are currently approximately 8.2 million refugees from Ukraine, predominantly in European countries. 5 million of those are under the temporary protection status by the EU. UNHCR publishes these numbers in the Ukraine situation page on the public operational data portal. Now, I said these figures are preliminary, and Director General Werner just before already mentioned there might be some doubts about this data, and we can talk a little bit why that might be. For example, one of the reasons is under the Temporary Protection Directive, people can go to a first country of asylum, get temporary protection status there, and they might subsequently move on to a second country of asylum, for example, to reunite with family members. They can get temporary protection status in that second country again, and in the statistics, and especially in preliminary statistics, we might double count them. In these preliminary figures, UNHCR gets the data from national authorities, and we aim to publish them as quick as possible to make them available. But obviously that means they don't undergo a full statistical quality assurance process. Another challenge we have with that data are returns. People do return to Ukraine for shorter and longer visits, for example, to visit family or to renew important documents. Now, again, countries treat that a little bit differently. UNHCR advocates to keep the temporary protection status for all people don't go back for longer than 3 months. But again, countries treat that a little bit inconsistently. And that means in some cases, someone, even on a shorter visit, might be taken out of the temporary protection status. And in another country of asylum, they might stay under the temporary protection status and show up in the statistics, even if they've returned for a longer amount of time. In addition to these preliminary statistics, UNHCR also publishes twice a year official statistics in the Global Trends Report and on our refugee data finder. Now, the problem with these figures is there's a delay between the reference date, which is June and December, and the publication date. For example, we haven't published yet our end 2022 figures, so the latest official data you could find is from June 2022, which admittedly is obviously very, very outdated at this point. That said, this data does undergo a full quality assurance process. And for example, right now, governments in Europe have worked to deduplicate what I described before in this onward movement. So basically to count everyone only once, even if they have several protection status in different countries. And this is going to be reflected in the end 2022 data, which is going to be published June this year. We are also aiming to update our preliminary figures in the operational data portal with this deduplication exercise, and currently working with governments to find solutions to the challenge of return statistics. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop there, and please do feel very welcome to ask any questions in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebastian, for that overview of the challenges and realities of documenting the large and complex flows of people over the last 14 months out of Ukraine. A quick reminder to all the participants to please post questions and comments to the chat window, as they will be prioritized in the approximate order that they get received. Our next presentation is from Ms. Carolina Klelinova, the head of the IOM Displacement Tracking Matrix team in Ukraine. She will give us an overview of IOM's monitoring and measurement of internal displacement in Ukraine. Please.
Good morning or afternoon, colleagues. I hope you can hear me well, and thank you to UNFPA for the invitation. As you understand, following the large-scale invasion in February last year, we witnessed mass movements, which are really the most significant dynamic influencing change in population in the country. And so you can remember images of people trying to flee Kiev, either by car or by train, packed trains, fuel shortages. It had been quite apparent very, very quickly to IOM that it is critically important for us to monitor these flows and understand the related needs in order to facilitate humanitarian assistance to this vulnerable population as fast as possible. And this is something that IOM implements globally in context of crises. Usually relying on the tools of the displacement tracking matrix. However, given the volatility of the situation, we had to be a bit creative, and so the traditional DTM approaches had to be twisted a little bit to suit the dynamic context in Ukraine. And so we also realized that we're working in quite unique settings. Ukraine is a modern nation. The population has a high rate of cell phone usage. The coverage by cell networks is relatively good and stable, even at times of war in the areas that are under the control of the government of Ukraine. And so we came up with a random digit dial KT survey that allowed us, since very early days of the conflict, to deliver statistically representative data on the general population. These are the general population survey reports, which you might have seen. And so we have been able to produce relatively precise data sets that describe the share of the population that are currently experiencing internal displacement in Ukraine. But some of the key challenges here that my colleagues already mentioned previously relate to the lack of reference figures on which these estimates could be applied for extrapolation. And so even though we didn't have precise understanding of the population data, we extrapolated with the best that we had, recognizing its limitations. Still, these data sets became a foundation for the planning of humanitarian assistance across the country by IOM and partners. But the challenges persist nevertheless, and we are now in full swing of conducting in-country consultations under the leadership of the Resident Coordinator's Office and implemented by IOM as a convener to resolve these challenges related to the reference population figures. As I already mentioned, extrapolation is extremely tricky and plugged by limitations, but so is data validation and triangulation. Some of the additional difficulties relate to what my colleague of UNHCR had been mentioning, that we currently lack understanding of the cross-border displacement figures. We don't know how many Ukrainians precisely reside outside of the Ukrainian territory. Neither border crossing statistics or the registration for protection status figures are reflecting returns which we understand from our own data collection are quite prominent. We know that out of the estimated 6 million returnees, at least 20% have come from abroad and have stayed in their homes for a significant period of time. And so it is therefore quite unclear how many Ukrainians remain within the country. And we also continue to struggle with the lack of access to hard-to-reach areas, either those that are very heavily affected by military operations or those that are not currently under the control of the government of Ukraine. And so how are we addressing these issues? These are shared concerns, not only experienced by IOM, but all data producers and data consumers who are critical of the information that is being provided to them. And so IOM has devised a strategy for leading a collective way forward. This is not something that can be resolved unilaterally by a single organization, but rather we are striving to support a harmonized approach among not only the humanitarian and recovery partners, but most importantly, including and serving the needs and interests of the government of Ukraine as a leader on recovery and assistance operation. To this end, in the end of March, we organized a symposium in Kiev titled Data for Durable Solutions, focused on understanding and finding a harmonized approach to displacement statistics in the country. A report is being finalized, which will outline some of the key agreements and the considerations that participants agreed upon. But in the meantime, please let me just mention some of the key ones. That honestly give us quite a lot of hope on the way forward, because what the event made possible is to start this conversation between data producers and data users to understand the limitations and raise awareness among data users of the continued challenges. And second, it provided a venue for technical experts to plan a joint way forward. And there has been quite a lot of commitment and interest in devising a harmonized approach in the form, for example, of a joint analytical framework for producing statistics on internal displacement in Ukraine, of course, related to the questions of population statistics more broadly. We also agreed to align basic definitions and key reference figures, in order to encourage and move a step forward towards interoperability of data sets produced by a variety of operational partners, and to ensure that these agreed upon definitions are in line with the priorities and strategy and understanding of the government of Ukraine as our key user, with whom we would like to align in this harmonized approach. We also want to support and agreed upon supporting the government as a leader on data for recovery more broadly, recognizing that the data that the government is collecting naturally are the most sustainable data sources moving forward, as well as the fact that the government of Ukraine has a very long tradition and capacity for producing high quality official statistics. And so we do not want to create a duplicate system of operational data in parallel, but rather supporting these official channels by whatever means we can to allow for triangulation or development of more precise estimates on part of the government. And this has been vehemently agreed upon by the participants, and giving us hope for a continued conversation and outlining some of the concrete steps that need to be taken in the coming weeks and months and potentially years to operationalize this vision. So the bottom line, just before wrapping up, is to say that displacement is ultimately the single most impactful mechanism causing population change over the last year, and IOM, along with other partners, remains ready to support the development of future population statistics with the data that we have been collecting that is available to us, and combining it with other sources to produce more trustworthy population figures for future reference of many data producing actors in the country. Thank you very much, and again, happy to answer any questions in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolina. for summarizing IOM's area-based assessments and general population surveys as useful sources of data to understand recent internal displacements in Ukraine. One challenge that is that the security situation in Ukraine remains challenging, as we have just heard from the head of the Statistic Office of Ukraine, and access to all the areas is difficult. Our next speaker, Andy Tatem, will provide some insight on the potential for remote sensing and alternative big data sources for population and displacement modeling. Andy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the invitation. I'm going to share my screen, hopefully you see, and I'm going to give a very quick whirlwind overview of some of the different types of methods that can be used to get to baseline population, and then some of the dynamics using new forms of data. So what we face is problems with population data, whether it's available but at coarse resolution, it's outdated or incomplete, or sometimes missing completely. But there are new forms of data that we can make use of to try and get more detail, more recent estimates, and those can come from satellite images and the ability to extract settlements from those, building heights, different indications of human presence on the landscape from brightness of nighttime lights, of land cover, and features that indicate, again, something about how humans distribute themselves on the landscape, with the idea of building up this picture of the landscape in the absence of ground enumeration, to try and fill some gaps, to try and get a more recent picture. In reality, it looks a bit more like this in terms of a stack of geospatial data sets. And what we're aiming to do is to go from either a situation like this, where we have coarse population counts and want to get more detailed estimates, or an area where we have missing data and we want to try and estimate those populations in those areas. So what we may have is data that cover those missing areas or are in more detailed picture. So from night lights, from land cover classifications, from the mapping of building footprints. And those help us go from this picture of a coarse resolution picture of population or missing data to estimates of populations using statistical models. And this is something that has been done across the world, and is in the UNFPA population data portal, health information systems. And the benefits of these kind of gridded data are that we can summarize them at different levels, whether that's administrative units, health units, settlement extents, or we can do analysis of how close, how many people there are within a service delivery area. We can overlay them with things like floods, earthquakes to understand populations affected. And we can look at access to healthcare, so look at the population distribution and the ability to, and travel times to different types of healthcare. So in the Ukraine situation, we worked with UNFPA here to take the register-based projections of population, which look like this, and then develop those statistical models to disaggregate those to grid square scale. And this produced these baseline estimates that have been used by a range of different agencies. And these are openly available. But that gives us the baseline, so how can we measure those changes? And this is where a range of different data sources can start to come in, whether it's the mapping of conflicts, of indications of things that affect how populations move. It's the mapping of damages to indicate that a population may not be in a certain location. It's the changes from things that you can see in satellites at the brightness of nighttime lights. And it's the use of mobile devices to understand the movement patterns, as Dr. Werner has talked about. And again, we can bring these together. Each one has their own biases and problems and gaps, but bringing them together with an understanding of the biases means that we can start to do things like this, where we're linking together census and phone records to look at population density changes. We can look at seasonal changes through changes in brightness in lights. And we can look at displacement and migration, bringing together the IOM DTM surveys to map out those changes. And this again is something that took place in collaboration with colleagues at Oxford, at IOM, UNHCR, on mapping changes in population through bringing together pre-conflict baseline, border crossings from UNHCR data, and in this case looking at daily active users of Facebook accounts. And this enabled, when accounting for those Facebook penetration rates, to look at the proportional change week by week from that baseline, as well as some of the demographic changes that occurred in different areas of the country, where some areas we saw huge migrations out, other areas we saw accumulations of population in the west, and different types of demographic changes. So just to finish off, I think the small area of population data can be pretty valuable. We've seen for humanitarian response. Traditional data sets are vital, but can be, of course, outdated, missing. And these new data sets can help complement traditional sources with more timely and detailed insights. But it is very important to understand and account for those biases and utilize models to obtain benefits from multiple data sources. They should just be seen as a complement rather than a replacement. And importantly, yes, this co-development with the statistics office is vital. They need to be the owners of the outputs. And there are many different sources and tutorials and backgrounds that I can share afterwards for anyone interested. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Andy, for this presentation. That wraps up our initial set of talks, and now I would like we have two sets of brief reflections. The first one from Ramesh Silva of UNFPA on what strategies are being employed to improve some national population projections in high mobility settings like Ukraine to better support system-wide humanitarian response that is equitable and transparent.
The realities of how difficult the current situation in Ukraine is with regard to estimating population size by age and sex at the lowest administrative level, and so we are and this is particularly challenging for us, but critically important for the humanitarian response in Ukraine. In terms of our responsibility at UNFPA and as part of the UN family, we are responsible for supporting the availability of subnational population projections for part of the humanitarian response. And these are what are called common operational data sets, and they are critical alongside of detailed information on administrative boundaries and the humanitarian caseload or humanitarian profile. And all of this work is guided by the standards laid out by the Interagency Standing Committee. What I wanted to do is highlight the importance of population projections, up-to-date population projections, and as Andy Tatum mentioned, as disaggregated as possible, have enormous consequences for our ability to understand the affected population, who's in need of different types of humanitarian assistance, and then how to target the humanitarian response plan and ensure that those most vulnerable and those who are in most need are supported. As we've discussed today, there's two big challenges here. The first is how can we produce subnational population projections with finer geographic disaggregation? On the left-hand side, I'm highlighting here the work that we have done with the State Statistical Service of Ukraine in projecting forward the population of Ukraine using the 2001 census and vital registration data over the last 20-odd years, as well as administrative migration data up till February 2022. And we've come up with projections that disaggregated by age and sex for admin level 1 areas and the 30 largest cities. However, on the right-hand side, what I'm highlighting here is the actual humanitarian decision-making and response actions are mobilized at the level of admin level 2 and admin level 3 geographies. And so there's a real challenge here in terms of aligning our statistical machinery with the needs of the humanitarian decision-making architecture. And then secondly, as we heard from our colleagues from IOM and UNHCR, but also from Director General Iho Werner himself, the mobility and just the scale and the rapidity of refugee outflows, internal displacement, and then also returnee back into Ukraine has been dramatic and poses a major challenge to now updating the population projections subnationally going forward in Ukraine. So as Director General Iho Werner mentioned, you know, the latest set of subnational population projections, which are projected up to January 2022, really leverage the quality and the ingenuity of the work done by the State Statistics Service of Ukraine over many decades, building on the 2001 census, using high quality complete vital registration data and detailed administrative records. Where we are right now, in terms of trying to project forward into 2023, is we still try to anchor that work in the 2001 census, but now are trying to combine multiple data sources. The traditional data sources, which the State Statistical Service of Ukraine has very heroically garnered and advanced, but also new data flows from UNHCR on refugee data and IOM on through its displacement tracking matrix mechanisms, but also, as Andy Tatum mentioned, social media data from Facebook, and also, as Iho Werner mentioned, mobile phone operator data from mobile phone companies in Ukraine itself. And with that, we're trying to update the projections at admin level 2 and admin level 3. As Carolina mentioned, this is a major effort by a number of partners that have come together through a number of mechanisms, of one of these, which is the Interagency Working Group on Interoperability of Baseline Population, Displacement and Refugee Data. And I want to acknowledge all of our partners who've been really involved in this. What the mandate of our interagency working group is really threefold. One, in Ukraine and a number of other countries, we're harmonizing the common operational data set, the subnational population projections, disaggregated by age and sex at the lowest level of geography, with refugee and internal displacement data. And then through this process of working through exercises in Ukraine, Mozambique, and a number of other countries, we're developing new technical standards, methods, and tools for this data interoperability between baseline population, refugee, and displacement data. And these are standards which don't yet exist. And so we're really building the ground up from the ground up here. And then thirdly, we're really trying to support the international statistical community, particularly national statistics offices like the State Statistical Service of Ukraine, but also humanitarian data actors in adopting these standards and methods and tools so that population and mobility data is better harmonized and interoperable so that they serve the needs of people most in need. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ramesh, for the overview of the motivation of this interagency group and the insight on the update to the common operational dataset on population statistics in high mobility settings. Thanks also for organizing this session of the World Data Forum. And now over to Ana Maria Pereira, who will help us understand how this work fits into the broader landscape of the humanitarian data ecosystem. Anna? on
Thank
behalf
you,
of
Patrick.
UNOCHA.
Thank you, Patrick, and good afternoon, everyone. Also, thank you to UNFPA for organizing the session and inviting us to be part of it. So I think the main reflection for us today is that having the right data at the right moment in a humanitarian crisis can make a huge difference for the affected people. As already highlighted by Romesh, for us in the international humanitarian system, the population projections and statistics are the starting point for estimating the number of people affected by a humanitarian crisis and also the number of people in need of assistance. So ultimately, these figures are used to inform humanitarian data ecosystems and to guide the decisions related to strategic response plans, or also for resource allocation, for programming, for service delivery. For this reason, for us to use adequate population projections and statistics is essential to correctly estimate both the current and also the future needs of a population that are affected by a crisis. But there's an important detail here that applies, of course, to Ukraine and to most of humanitarian emergencies. That's the issue of population movements, which is a reality in many crises. So when a crisis hits, you usually see internal displacement or also people seeking refuge in other countries. So depending on the scale of these movements might cause significant changes in the demographics at both national and subnational level. These changes can be in terms of number of people living in different provinces or districts, but also it can have a significant impact in demographic profiles of the population. So, for example, it could be increasing the number of female-headed households in some areas, reducing the young populations in some regions, or increasing number of unaccompanied children. So there is, of course, different changes that can happen due to these movements. So looking into the case of Ukraine, before the war, the projected population was around 44 million people. But this crisis caused a massive number of Ukrainians to become refugees and IDPs. As you heard earlier, there are about 8.2 million Ukraine refugees registered in Europe currently, and more than 5 million internally displaced people, plus also some, I think about 5 million people that are returnees. So if you only count the refugees and the IDPs, this amounts to more than 13 million people that had to flee their homes since the war. And this represents about 30% of the whole population. So this is not, of course, not all the crises have the same magnitude of this one in Ukraine, but this is a clear example of how a change in the population statistics can be massive. Now, as I mentioned before, the population statistics are essential for the humanitarian system to plan their response strategy and activities. And so in the case of Ukraine, if we would continue using this pre-crisis population estimates, of course, it leads us to plan our response based on inaccurate data. So the consequences would be that maybe, for example, we'd plan a massive response in an area that lost a lot of population, and maybe in other regions we would plan a much lower response than needed because maybe this area received a high number of IDPs, and the caseload, the number of people that need assistance, is much higher than we would see only based on numbers, right, or pre-crisis statistics. So the conclusion is that updating the population statistics estimates at subnational level based on these population movements would be critical for us to ensure that our strategic response plans are fit for purpose and also fit for a coherent humanitarian system in general, because it's not only for the strategic response plans, this data, of course, can be serve other purposes for different agencies for their also operational planning, etc. So in closing, I just wanted to say that I really believe that the work that we started with this working group with the case of Ukraine, it really needs to continue and be extended to other countries, so that we ensure that in the future we will have better methods that will help us to improve the quality or the accuracy of the figures that we use in humanitarian planning across the board, and hopefully in a simpler manner, because of course we face a number of challenges, but hopefully we'll find ways to guide at least our colleagues that work on the humanitarian emergencies on how quickly or better update the figures that they use. So for me, I really think this would be a major step for the whole humanitarian community. So that's it. Thank you very much for your attention, and back to Patrick.
Thank you, Ana Maria. And thanks for summarizing how critical interoperable and aligned data on population, geospatial, and humanitarian caseload are for the equity, quality, and timeliness of humanitarian decision-making and action. We have limited time for Q&A, and right now, when I look at the list in the chat, I personally don't see any questions that have been posted in the chat. If any of the presenters or participants have any questions to one another, you have maybe a minute or two for this kind of exchange. Does anyone else that was participating in the meeting wants to ask any questions or has any feedback to anyone else? Ramesh, any additional words of wisdom?
Thank you, Patrick. I wonder whether, if we still have Director General Ihor Werner, whether we might give him the floor for a few closing remarks. In particular, I think he mentioned the challenges and the commitment of the State Statistical Service of Ukraine to maintain the operations of the national statistical system during these difficult times, and even to try to continue to transition towards a register-based census. And so I wonder whether we could hear a few additional thoughts in terms of what he sees as the major challenges and areas where additional support would be welcome.
I would like to thank all the participants for the participation today, and to all our speakers and panelists, including and especially to our colleagues from Ukraine. So today's discussion reminds us of how important a strong population data systems and international cooperation are in ensuring a strong evidence base to support everyone affected by humanitarian crisis. They point to positive progress in joining up often dispersed and disjointed data system in ensuring that high quality population evidence is readily available and actionable by our humanitarian first responders. But today's discussion also reinforced the importance of robust population data system across the humanitarian peace and development nexus. Today's session also highlighted the commitment by the government of Ukraine and the international technical partners in advancing this important agenda to leave no one behind and contribute to stronger and more inclusive population data system, even in the most challenging of crisis settings. Thanks to everybody for participating, and have a good day and rest of the conference. Thanks to everyone.
Thank you, Patrick. Have a good day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.